Welcome to Elevating La Cultura podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and are willing to share their passion with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with a Latina perspective. This is season 6, and it's going to be featuring Latinas in the food space. I hope this season is inspiring and perhaps even nostalgic as we hear stories we can relate to. I'm so excited to share these stories and talk about food. So vámonos, and let's get into it. Hola, today I'm talking with Dalina, a registered dietitian and positive health advocate. She works with people to help them reclaim the joy and pleasure of diet-free living. She talks about how most of us have spent our lives being fed stories that our bodies, our culture, our way of being is wrong. So she helps people remember how fun and free life can be when they drop the weight of body shame and chronic dieting. So please enjoy our conversation. Hello, I am so grateful for my next guest. I'm talking with Dalina today. I've been a huge follower for a number of years, and I'm just so thankful to be able to have this conversation today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. I don't know. Every time somebody asks me that, I'm like, I don't know what to say. My name is Dalina, and I am a registered dietitian. So yeah, I like to talk a lot about nutrition.
Yes, and if you are not following on social media, we will share all of that later. But I love how you always intro yourself in your social media videos. So that's how I know you as a registered dietitian for Latinas.
Yes, that's what I do every day.
Yeah, so I would love to hear what brought you to doing what you do. Have you always wanted to be in this space?
So always wanted to be in the medical field. I did not know what a dietitian was growing up. I think a lot of people don't realize what a dietitian is. I think the normal understanding of nutrition, people think a nutritionist is like the expert or who they should be getting the information from. But in the United States, at least, I know in some countries we are called nutritionists, in other countries we're called dietistas. It depends on where you're from. But in the United States, the term nutritionist is not. It's not looked after. It's not a term that's legalized or looked thoroughly for. It's not a licensure, I will say, or like or a title that you would have to go through an accreditation to get. And so therefore, in the United States, the medical provider for nutrition is a registered dietitian. And so anybody can technically call themselves a nutritionist in the United States with no education, but you can't call yourself a registered dietitian without having the actual credentials, right? Um, and so I like to differentiate that because all dietitians are nutritionists, but not all nutritionists are dietitians, which is, a easier way to think about it is that like a dietitian is covered by insurance while a nutritionist isn't because we're considered the medical provider. I don't know, that was long-winded.
No, I think that's really great. A starting point, a definition, because in this world of lots of influencers on social media, like I hear nutritionist, I hear health coach, I hear dietitian, and like I don't know what is actually going to help me.
Yeah. And it's not to badmouth that nutritionists, which I think that there are some great nutritionists out there. I will say that if you have a bachelor's degree in nutritional sciences, you're a nutritionist. That's why all dietitians are nutritionists. And sometimes people get their PhD in nutrition and can be a nutritionist, or even like a master's degree in nutrition, and they're considered a nutritionist. So it's not to like say that nutritionists don't always have a credential or the knowledge to do this work. It's that a lot of the times there's people that are calling themselves that and have zero education. I mean, they could just do an online course for an hour and get like this certification from I don't know where and say they're a nutritionist, or people just say they are because they think that they learned a new way of eating, or something worked for them and they want to sell it to other people, and so they call themselves a nutritionist, which is unfortunate because we go to school to learn what happens to food the minute it touches your mouth to the minute you go to the bathroom, and get rid of it. And we're in the medical fields because we learn how to treat disease with food, right? So that is our job in the medical system, either in the hospital, in outpatient, in the community, right? Like we're educating on these issues, and health coaches actually are, for some insurance companies will cover health coaches, but you'll notice that they can't really like they can't give you medical nutrition therapy, which is what a dietitian can do, right? So it's really iffy, and unfortunately it's just a lot of misinformation out there. And so I think it's empowering for you to ask for people's credentials. You can ask them, like, where'd you go to school? Where did you get this education? And that way you can be a little bit more assured, um, of what information you're getting.
Yeah, I think that like you said, there is a lot of information and a lot of people trying to build that trust factor. And I think that there has been a lack of understanding when it comes to cultural identities. What prompted you to study this path?
Yeah, so I went to school to be a pediatrician. And so I feel like I say this in every podcast. I'm like, people are probably tired of hearing me say this. So I needed a, gym or like physical activity credit. And my advisor was like, you waited too long because I do not like exercising. Or I didn't at that point. I have a different relationship with exercise now. Um, and I waited too long. So my advisor was like, fine, like just take nutrition. It'll count the semester. And I was like, okay. So I took nutrition and I really just fell in love with preventative care. And so in my mind, as 18-year-old, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a dietitian. I'm going to cure diabetes. I'm going to teach everybody how to eat healthy, and it's going to be great. And obviously, that is not how things have been, or I have learned a lot and grown a lot. Um, in the last, gosh, 12 years, 14 years. I don't even know. I can't even do the math in my head.
I think that there is always like that turning point that leads us to like truly follow that our path that we're so passionate about. Can you talk more about that turning point that led you to create the brand and the platform that you have now?
Yeah. So, when you go to school for dietetics here in the United States, and I will say that talking to other dietitians in other countries, unfortunately, the education is very much from a euro-centric view, as we know a lot of things in our societies are. And that's because I think the United States has done a really good job at positioning themselves as the number one researchers, the ones that quote unquote have the gold standards. And so they kind of like infiltrate a lot of our countries with that information. Unfortunately, what I have noticed as I have grown and have practiced and kind of have been in the field this long, is that again, that information is very biased and stereotypical, right? What I learned in my textbooks, um, from a cultural standpoint, was coming from those stereotypes, right? Was coming from the biases. I learned the science, right, of like what food does, right? That I can't argue, and that I is what I speak about. But the foods that we talked about were very much, of course, because I'm living in the United States, the American diet, right? The American food. But the issue with that is that the United States is diverse, right? We can't just take that way of eating and kind of like disperse it through the masses, because we know that people are from all different countries, walks of lives, cultures, and to take that way of eating and only elevate certain foods, does a disservice to everyone else, right? So I always say it takes, you know, a special kind of dietitian to be able to kind of like take that information and say, wait a second, this doesn't seem right, right? And usually we learn that from like an anti-racist standpoint, right? Which is not taught to us at school. At least myself, all my dietitian friends that are in the field doing this type of work, we have had to go out of our educational system to learn these things and then be able to then translate it to our communities, because it's very, like I said, one way, right? It's eat this, eat that. These things are bad. These things are good. And so I was, when I graduated, I was just like, this just doesn't seem right. Like, I grew up in a Dominican household. My mom cooks these foods every single day. Nobody is quote unquote sick. Everybody is thriving. Things taste amazing. I'm looking at these ingredients. I'm learning what they are, right? Because I learned those names from my mom in Spanish, but I didn't know what they were in English. And I'm like, holy crap, like this is loaded with nutrition. This is exactly what we should be talking about. But unfortunately, the information that's being put out to the public is not coming from that lens. So, as a dietitian, it has taken a lot from me to be able to, stand up to this information and say like it's not right, and this is how we can combat it. But not everybody does that, because it's almost a form of assimilation. It's almost a form of like, well, I spent all this money to learn this information, right? There's no way it can be wrong. There's no way that like that the foods that we eat are quote unquote healthy. Like I learned that they weren't. So it's really unfortunate, because it's hard to walk away from that when you feel like you've achieved the American dream, or have finally like have an education, and you're like the first one in your family to have a college degree. There's so much that goes into it. So like I said, it takes someone to be able to be like, hold on, this just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I think growing up in a predominantly white space, white
Yeah.
community, going to a predominantly white school growing up, like that is, we're taught through the lens
Yeah.
of white educators.
Mm-hmm.
And even like my mom would like make the foods that
Mm-hmm.
we were in community with. So like
Yeah.
like we would go to potlucks. Like I only had like Mexican food when my family from Mexico would visit or when my father would
Yeah.
cook. And so I grew up thinking that like all these myths that
Mm-hmm.
white rice is
Mm-hmm.
bad and we
Mm-hmm.
needed to go on keto or
Yeah.
do like no carbs. And
Yeah.
I, when you are so young and all of these messages are being
Mm-hmm.
thrown at you from your education, from your house, but then also like, then it's okay when you're in Mexico to eat all these foods. Like, there was always a disconnect between my Mexican culture and my life in the United States. And I think that that messes, like, it messed
Yes.
me up. It
Yes.
messes your self image
Mm-hmm.
up. And yeah, like, I love that you said that it is assimilation because we are trying, like, I realized that I grew up with this duality of
Mm-hmm.
being one person when I was in Mexico and around my family, and one person when I was in the United States trying to fit in. And those two clashed so often, whether it was like between speaking Spanish and speaking English, eating food from Mexico and being told that it was amazing and loving it.
Yeah.
And that's some of my favorite food. But then coming here and saying, okay, no carbs, the diet starts Monday. But there was no real like education around it because the messages were so different. Um,
Yeah. No, and that's the unfortunate part. And I think like we see that in so many aspects of that immigrant life. Not just in food, we see that in the way that we act, how we change, how we speak, how we change, how we walk around in the United States is completely different than we would maybe back at home. And that form of like the American dream. Like, I am in this country, I want to succeed. It's not just about assimilation. And assimilation is, walking the walk, but it's also like, it is. It's the word is assimilation. It's immersing yourself in this culture that you want to believe is the best, um, without realizing the harm that it's actually causing.
Yeah, and I think I talk about this a lot in the work that I do, that it is our generation that is doing the work to not only heal, but also educate the generation before us, and then heal for the generations after us. And so it is a lot. And I know that you do a lot of education through your work. And I am curious as to how you manage or deal with or find time to regroup after pouring so much into uh, talking about the lies that we've been told, and even maybe answering, like on social media, answering to the trolls that like comment on your
You've seen
stuff.
them before, huh?
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm just like, oh, I don't know how I would be able to answer that. I don't know. I'll let you answer.
Um, so I delete social media daily and on the weekends. Um, and I try to unplug as much as I can, right? I, try to have a work-life balance in the sense that like I am the one that does school pickups. I am the one, that's home, primarily, with the kids. And so, I try to have that balance, which is really hard, but unplugging from social media is probably like one of the best things to do. I also, when it comes to trolls, I try to not engage if I can tell, you can tell immediately from the way that they comment whether or not they're going to listen and want to be educated. If someone is going to, be, or seems like they might want to listen to a different way, I might type an answer. It depends on the mood that I am in. Sometimes I'm in a very sassy, spicy mood, so I will like gun ho go for it. Sometimes I'm like, not today. I'm not feeling it, so I will just block, and delete, block and bless, as a lot of us say. But it all depends on whether or not I feel like the person is going to be interested in listening, because obviously, I love to educate. That's what I do. I have my master's in nutrition education for that reason, right? Like, I've always wanted to teach. And so it's important for me to, like, if somebody's going to be willing, or it gives me kind of like a glimpse of them wanting to be willing to learn, then I will try my best. If not, then I keep it moving. But it's hard. It's hard because I think that even with COVID, like, it exacerbated this, like, being on our phones and being online. And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, my screen time has been way too much today. And then other times I'm able to just like unplug and I'm like, oh, holy crap, I didn't even touch my phone. So it all depends on the day, but I think it's about having that self-compassion with ourselves to know that, like, we live in a world that everything's at our fingertips, and it's okay to disconnect even if you're running a business on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you show up on social media. I love how direct you are, and um, just like to the point. And you call out like these lies that we've been
Yeah.
told. And I think that is like, I don't need the fluff. I don't need to feel good like on social media. I'm the kind of person that, like, I go to social media to learn, and I follow
Yeah.
people to learn, especially on TikTok. I think
Yeah.
Instagram for me is somewhere where I can like connect with people and like see the pretty photos and the fun videos. But on TikTok, I make a point to follow people that are going to educate me and elevate my way of thinking. And I think you do that so well.
Well, thank you. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, I know, because sometimes like I think when you are in that position of educating, you have to be prepared to
Hmm.
talk to the people who are just not willing to listen. And that
Yeah.
is hard because we are people and we
Yeah.
have like feelings and we have the education. And when you're just looking on a little screen, like you don't make that, it's not as easy to make that humanity connection.
Yes. Yes. And that's the issue with trolls, right? They very seldom see you as a human on the other side of the screen when they're, you know, sh screaming visceral at you.
Yeah, yeah. Which
Yeah.
it sometimes surprises me why people get offended when, like, the things that you're saying are just trying to help people. Um,
It's beyond me, but again, I think that a lot of it, and I'll just think of something that's happened just a few weeks ago, and maybe you remember this or not, but I think that a lot of it is because, again, it's really hard to hear that what you've believed your whole entire life has been a lie, right? So, especially if you're in the profession, right? So, having someone who works in the field and again thinks that they're doing an amazing job because they're helping people and they're educating people still from that Eurocentric way, right? For me to come in and say, well, technically that's wrong, right? Because you could be doing it in a different way. That's really hard for them because they're like, I've been in the field for 12 years and I have helped reduce blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, but what's the rate of retention? Like, are you clients actually happy? Are they able to thrive, right, outside of this like micromanaging of what they're eating, right? Or is that all life consuming, right? And so had this one person, go off on me saying that, like, oh, I work in, the field and I see how our communities, what did they say? Oh, they said they only eat fried foods. They, only drink sodas. It's definitely the way that we're cooking that's killing us. And like all of these stereotypes and biases that were being taught in school, which I know that's where they learned it, and also because that's what's being, said in the media and like just the what we're being pictured as Latinos when we think of like even in movies or everywhere everywhere we look, that's what the picture is for a Latino person. And they just didn't really like me saying that maybe they shouldn't be working in the field because they're perpetuating misinformation. And then I broke down why they were wrong and what we need to work on. And, they didn't like it. So if you come into my comments, you're opening it up for conversation. So you can't be mad if I tell you you're wrong and show you the proof.
yeah, I think a lot of people, like, there's this disconnect, especially when you said you've dedicated your life to
Yeah.
doing what you think is right, and then you are shown like the
You're
mirror
being
is lifted.
challenged.
Yeah, and especially when you are being shown that what you are perpetuating is racist or it's
And that's what it is. It's that nobody is prepared to hear that maybe what they are doing is a form of racism, right? Not because they are doing it willingly, but because that's what we were taught, right? We were taught from a racist view. We were taught from a colonized view. And it's all interconnected. Like we cannot talk about one without the other. And that's really hard, especially when we think about the diaspora of like the Latin community, right? Or, the fact that we're not a monolith, or even when we think about like voting, which is so like present right now. We don't all vote the same because we don't all have the same priorities. So if we think about health in the United States, we need to break it down not just by the Latino population, but we need to break it down by access, right? We need to break it down by socioeconomic status, education, and, resources. And when we break it down in that way, we know that the lowest income Latinos are going to have worse health outcomes than higher income Latinos who are usually, more white passing or maybe have, moved up in the corporate ladders or just have, different access than most of the people that um, we see in documentaries, or when we talk about poverty, or when we talk about diabetes in the United States, which are unfortunately people that are living in, conditions that are, they don't have access. And so how can we sit there and compare apples to oranges? Like, we can't. So we're being lumped into this one statistic, and we're all being scared and, being told that, our chances of having diabetes are over 50%, but nobody's talking about, like, well, okay, what does that even mean? And where do these numbers come from? So that's hard.
Yeah, that is hard. How do you help empower people to then go back to their doctors and advocate for themselves?
So that's a really hard question because I think it all goes back to safety. I'm a big proponent of, like, you have to feel safe in being able to stand up for yourself, because if you're going to walk into a doctor's office and be berated and be told that you're wrong and that you don't know what you're talking about, then I'd rather you not, right? I'd rather you just take that piece of paper and keep it moving. But if you have the ability to have a doctor that's going to listen to you, or even, come with somebody that could um, advocate for you, then, we can, talk about these things with your doctors, right? You can ask, to be seen as more than a number, or you can ask, well, what if, I'm already doing XYZ, then what is the next form of treatment, or what else can I do, right? If my weight or my ethnicity wasn't, this, what would you recommend? Which a lot of the times varies, right? Um, when it comes to seeing a doctor. Because sometimes, we know that healthcare is very racist. And so, um, a lot of the times I just like to empower people by knowledge, right? They know, they learn from me, and then they can just take what their doctor says with a grain of salt when it comes to certain things, right? I think that it's important to understand that we still have science behind a lot of things, and it's okay to question it, but um, a lot of it is still prevalent. It's just the way that it's being told to us, and maybe you could ask for it in a different form, in a different way. But I think that, I want to say that, like, medicine is needed, right? Like, one of the biggest things that I see in our community is that a lot of people will be like, well, I don't want to take medicine. I can just cure it with food. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not how it works. We have to do both, right? Sometimes you will need medicine. And so I don't want to sound like a doctor hater or like a medical system hater, because I work in the medical system. I just think, like, we need to be empowered to understand. And I usually say, like, my job as a medical provider is to educate you and help you understand what your choices are, and then you can make those choices, right? And a good doctor will also do that. So you are allowed to ask for options. You're allowed to ask to be educated. Why are you asking me to do this? What are your reasonings behind it, right? Because then you can understand, and then you feel more empowered. So I think that it's important to differentiate that, because I would never want anybody to think that I'm just, like, you know anti-medicine, because I'm not.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we often think that it's one or the other and
Yes.
that one is better. But there's
Yes.
this, like, I think we need to be talking more about how we can, like,
The
use
duality of
them,
it.
yeah, in partnership so that it can actually
Yeah.
help.
I think two truths can be true, and that's really hard for a lot of people to understand. I often hear, like, oh, I want to reverse my diabetes. You can't do that. You cannot reverse diabetes. Once you've been diagnosed, you have something that's happening inside of your body that needs attention, right? Either you're not producing enough insulin, or your cells are not accepting the insulin. We can't reverse that. Just like when someone has cancer, we don't say they're cured, we say they're in remission, right? You can't reverse cancer. You can't reverse diabetes. You can technically be in remission, but that's not the word that we use, right? We just say it's in control, right? Different diseases, we use different words. And so when we think about just diabetes, itself, and how people are out here saying, "Oh, I'm going to teach you how to reverse your diabetes or reverse your diabetes in 10 days," like all of these like gimmicky, scammy information on all of these apps. If you have diabetes, you're going to be like, "Of course, I will do anything to reverse my diabetes." But it's important to understand that that's not possible because there's something already going on in your body that we cannot fix. We cannot give pancreas transplants, right? We cannot give cell transplants in the sense of like help, we can help your cells try to accept more insulin. We can do things to help the acceptance of it. We can help your body, in other ways, and that's what medication is for, but you can't technically cure it or reverse it. And I think that's really important to understand, that sometimes you're going to have to do both, right? You're going to have to accept those two truths, that you can manage it with food alongside medication, and that you did nothing wrong, and that that is okay. We're living longer as a human species. So we're seeing a lot more diseases. But then the beauty of it is that now we have science that helps us with a lot of that.
I think that it's also helpful when we have representation in this space, in the medical space. Have you seen a shift or a growing number of like Latinas in this space that you're in than when you first were in school?
Well, I would say that the statistics are still the same, but I see it more because I'm able to see it more because of social media, right? Per se, like me in school, no, I was the only one. I was the only one in all my education, the only Latina in all of it. But I also live in Pennsylvania, and I went to a school that was, you know, predominantly not of color. And so, of course, if I was in New York, that would have been a whole different story, right? I've probably would have known a lot more Latinas in my education. And it wasn't until I was like an adult. And I mean, I was an adult when I was in school, but like, it wasn't until like I got out in the field and started going to like conferences that I noticed some. And now, because of social media, I know a lot more. But the numbers have been pretty steady in like the 6%. But do we need more? Yes. But are there barriers? 100%. It is not easy to become a dietitian, and that's an unfortunate part of dietetics, is that people don't know that it's a medical profession. And two, it's really hard to become a dietitian because our internship or like our residency is not paid. Like nurses and doctors get paid during their, residencies or internships. We don't. So that's a huge barrier to becoming a dietitian, because if you're a student of color and you're living off of loans already, you have to take another loan for this 1 year internship, and then pay for the exam, right? It's a big barrier, and there aren't that many schools for dietitians, so that's another barrier, um, and it's a lot of gatekeeping in the field, because unfortunately people in power don't look like us, so it's a lot. But if you want to be a dietitian, I'm going to plug in my favorite people, my favorite nonprofit, Diversified Dietetics, which, was created by my friends, Tamara and Deanna, to, help the BIPOC community. They have their own internship, they have scholarships, they help with mentorship. I'm one of their mentors. They help with, applying, with getting, you know, um, your resume checked, everything that you can think of. You can get from Diversified Dietetics. And then there's, resources, and you can find dietitians of color there.
Well, hopefully, the more we talk about it, the more we can get things to change in the
Yes.
future and to get more people access to this education. Are there any people that influenced you throughout your journey as a dietitian?
As a dietitian, no. I will say, um, because the dietetics field is really weird. I feel like more people know what a dietitian is now than they did 12, 14 years ago. I'll tell you that. When I told people I was a dietitian, they'd be like, what? And now people are like, oh, okay, we're seeing more dietitians in the media, obviously social media. um And I will say that, like, when I was going to school to be a dietitian, I didn't even know what a dietitian, like, I was in school to be a dietitian, I still didn't get it. So I didn't really have many to look up to. But now I will say that I have like a really great group of friends that are dietitians of all different backgrounds. And we're able to have these very nuanced, honest conversations around nutrition, around oppression and racism. And I look up to everything that they're doing, right? Because we're all doing really cool things in our own way. But it just goes to show you just how much we can do with our credentials that sometimes you can't do with a lot of other professions, right? Like being a dietitian opens up the door to do a lot of different types of work, and you can find your niche, you can find your, what makes you happy and thriving, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I think that community is huge, especially if you haven't, like, if you're grappling with these thoughts on your own and making these realizations, even if you're just like following people and hearing these new ideas, it's hard to grapple with the fact that you've been taught one
Hmm.
way your whole life, and then someone is giving you permission to accept your culture, accept the cultural foods, think about who you are and your identity in a different, more positive way. It can be hard to do that
Yeah.
alone. So I'm glad that you have found community, and I always talk about how important it is to find people that you can talk to and have these hard and honest conversations with,
Yeah.
that also understand where you're coming from.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I've had conversations and the gaslighting is real,
Oh
and
yes,
it does
100%.
it does not help in the growth. But hopefully the more that we have these conversations and bring awareness to this different way of thinking, this way of saying, like, look, you are who you are and there's not enough information out
Yeah.
there, and what you're struggling with is like, it's okay. Like, let's talk about it. Let's keep having these conversations, because it is hard to talk about racism
It is.
openly,
Yeah.
or like even microaggressions, or even like
Mhm.
saying, I think I was just gaslit. And like,
Yeah.
it is hard. People don't want to talk about it
No.
openly for fear of being gaslit even
Yeah.
more.
And retaliation.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to ask what your favorite food was growing up, and is that the same now?
Yes, it has always been the same. Um, when we're talking about just like my favorite food, I would say that it's definitely lombrines, which is like a Dominican dish. And all my tias know that it's my favorite, so they make it for me all of the time, and it has always been my favorite since I was a kid. And so like I have a very special relationship with it.
Yes. I think my food has always been my favorite. And it's so interesting when I ask my guests this question, because a lot of times it's the same as
It's
when
a, yeah,
you're a kid.
yeah.
Um, so I love that. Do you make it at home as well for your family?
I don't make it. I should probably learn to make it, honestly. I mean, I would, if I had to make it, I would, but it's not a dish that we eat very often, I would say, in the Dominican culture. Um, and like I said, it's literally only made by my mom every once in a while, or like my tias when they know I'm coming over. Um, but I don't make it, no. But can I? Sure. But I prefer them to make it because I feel like it's never the same.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's just not the same.
Yeah. Have there been any patterns, ideas, or limiting beliefs that you've had to work through, especially as an anti-diet dietitian? I know you've said that in some of your videos, that you're the anti-diet dietitian.
Well, I mean, it's a term that a lot of us use. I didn't coin it. That is not something that I invented. Um, but no, I think that again, I had to unlearn a lot of what I learned in school, right? Like, I think that again, it wasn't just all of a sudden I was like, oh, I understand everything. Here I am. It took years of learning and evolving and, you know, relearning and knowing that I didn't want to cause any more harm. So at the beginning, even though I was very much like we can eat our foods, I was still not, you know, fully there. It took, 2, 3 more years for me to be where I am now, right? It took a lot of outside learning to figure out, like, okay, we're more than just numbers, health can come in any size. Weight loss is, trauma and, or I would say like intentional weight loss and restriction is traumatic to your body. It causes more harm than it will ever cause any good. Um, and so it took a lot for me to get there, right? At the beginning, I was still not there. And I've had to, really learn and get rid of a lot of the crap that was taught to me that was not real or true.
If someone is just starting to go through this process of relearning, what are one or two things that they can like hold on to as they're doing that?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that you are a whole person. You're not just statistics or numbers. And unfortunately, it's really hard to find real health when you're constantly trying to shrink yourself to fit a mold that was never created for us. And so, knowing that you deserve to take up space, that you deserve to be happy now in the body that you have now, that the body that you have now deserves to be nourished, and that you deserve to know and do healthy behaviors. To me, that's where we can all start, because once you start realizing that you deserve it, you're able to kind of like understand it.
Hmm. That's so powerful. What is some encouragement or advice for the next generation?
I think they're doing just fine. I think they've shown us.
Yes, I have so much hope for
They're
them.
doing they're doing very well for themselves. I would say definitely, for the younger generation, it's important to like remember that two truths can be true, right? I think that's important for all of us to remember, and also, kind of like understand that health is way more than just looks, which sometimes is hard with like TikTok and Instagram.
Yes, for sure. I think that we are such a visual like society
Yeah.
that it is it is hard. Like it's easy to say it. Um it takes a lot more mental strength to like accept it. But you're right. Like the next generation is amazing and I am just filled with so much hope for them.
Me too.
Yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so thankful for your time. Where can people find you and work with you?
Yeah, so you can find me over on Instagram at your.latina.nutritionist. On TikTok, there's no dots, so it's just your Latina nutritionist. I just started YouTube, so it's also your Latina nutritionist. And yeah, and if you want to get started, if you want to like know what I'm all about, I have a 3-part masterclass that's $27. It gives you 3 hours of, education and going through all of this information that, you and I spoke about today. And then if you really want to dive in and you want to get that like personalized nutrition education, then you can come join my subscription. And you can come have like those weekly nuanced, personalized conversations with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I've appreciated your time, your wisdom, and just your willingness to share your story and the reality of the work that you do.
Thank you.
All right, we will talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
I'm so happy I was able to talk with Dalina and we were able to get real about the need to educate ourselves through our cultural lens and not just believe the biased views of a euro-centric medical outlook. I'm hopeful that the more we bring awareness to this conversation, the more we free ourselves from guilt about enjoying the foods that mean so much to our cultura. Okay, amigos, thank you so much for listening. There'll be a new episode every Tuesday, so after you listen, feel free to take a screenshot and post on Instagram and tag at Elevating La Cultura, or send me a DM. You can also comment on this YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories that I share. So leave a review on Apple Podcasts so we can get more ears listening to these stories and we can continue elevating La Cultura. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Bye.